The Barbarian. Chapter 1. Part 1. The barbarian awakened with a startling jolt. His senses flooded back as he realized his precarious position. Suspended upside down by a tightly wound snare trap, he felt the blood rushing to his head, pulsing in his ears. A peaceful forest surrounded him. The stark contrast to his predicament was not lost on him. He swayed calmly despite his disoriented state. The leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tirelessly drummed against a tree trunk. His memory offered no clues as to how he ended up in this trap or in this forest. The barbarian looked at the forest floor and saw a massive battle axe, and with it, a wave of fleeting visions, glimpses of brutal murder, blood, and viscera. He knew not who he was, but he knew that axe was his. He reached for his axe, and the momentum swayed him. After several long seconds, he was able to grab it. Instantly, he raised the axe in his awkward upside-down suspension. The heavy steel of his great axe bit into the thick ropes of the snare, but the forceful swing, hampered by his disadvantage, struck true only in its ineffectiveness. The ropes, taut and unyielding, merely frayed slightly under the glancing blow. The snare held fast, and the barbarian dangled precariously. The forest floor was a dizzying distance below. Frustration gnawed at the barbarian as the wood of the axe handle strained against his grip. The barbarian swiveled his head. His upside-down perspective made the forest a dizzying kaleidoscope of green and brown. He noticed the snare was not merely a simple rope, but a cunningly crafted mechanism of thick, braided vines, anchored securely to a sturdy tree limb high above. A roughly carved wooden pin, driven deep into a knot in the vines, appeared to be the trigger that held him aloft. Beneath him the undergrowth was thick, but he saw glimpses of disturbed earth and snapped twigs, suggesting a path or the recent passage of something heavy. A faint, earthy scent, something musky and unfamiliar, hung in the air. The sound of the forest continued around him. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, but a new, distant snap of a twig caught his ear, barely audible over the rush of blood in his head. With a grunt of effort, he swung his great axe once more, and this time, the sharpened edge found purchase. The braided vines groaned and snapped under the powerful blow, and unraveled with a loud crack. For a terrifying moment, he fell, and the world flipped as gravity reasserted its claim. He hit the forest floor with a jarring thud, and a sharp pain bloomed in his side as the air rushed from his lungs. The great axe clattered beside him. Bruised but free, he pushed himself up and shook off the disorientation that held his senses. The snare lay in tangled pieces around his feet, a broken reminder of his recent predicament. The faint, musky scent grew stronger, and the quiet rustling of the leaves seemed to hold a new, subtle tension. The barbarian patted himself down. His hands probed for serious injury. A throbbing ache echoed along his left side, a clear result of the impact with the ground. His ribs felt tender, but a quick assessment confirmed nothing was broken. A few scrapes and bruises were evident, and the sensation of being upside down still lingered, making his head feel light. He was certainly worse for wear, but there was nothing that seemed immediately debilitating. The barbarian looked left, then right. Immediately, he pulled down his trousers, went into a squatting position, and a wet flurry of feces spayed from him and onto the ground. The familiar earth accepted the waste, with no reaction. The feculent scent in the air, however, seemed to scream as his gaze swept over the immediate area. The barbarian searched for a suitable natural material. Several large, broad leaves from a nearby shrub looked like a viable option, though perhaps a bit rough. Closer to his feet, were patches of soft, damp moss, clinging to the gnarled roots of an ancient oak. The scent in the air persisted, and he could not shake the feeling that the shadows between the trees are deeper than they should be, and that his action may have drawn unwanted attention. He gathered a generous clump of the soft, damp moss, its coolness a stark contrast to his skin. It served its purpose adequately. He finished, and instinctively glanced around. The feeling of being watched intensified. A new gamey odor started emanating from a dense thicket to his right, a place where the sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy. A faint rustling, distinct from the wind, stirred from that direction. The barbarian began to move, and a guttural shriek tore through the air, and two small green-skinned figures burst from the undergrowth, their eyes, beady and malicious, fixed on him, with their crude weapons already raised. The goblins paused and exchanged confused glances to each other upon seeing him in his current predicament. The barbarian wasted no time as he pulled up his trousers and responded with a swing of his great axe with lightning speed. In a wide, powerful arc, the polished steel glinted in the dappled sunlight as the blade connected with the closest goblin's shoulder and made a sickening thud. It had cleaved through its crude leather armor and scrawny form. The goblin let out a choked gurgle, its beady eyes glazing over as it collapsed to the forest floor, motionless. Witnessing its companion's swift demise, the remaining goblin let out a high-pitched squeal of terror as it dropped its crude spear and scrambled to turn tail, and vanished back into the dense undergrowth. The barbarian surged forward, intent on pursuing the fleeing goblin, but it had already disappeared into the dense undergrowth. Its small form was swallowed by the shadows of the forest. The scent of its kind quickly faded, leaving him alone in the clearing once more. The silence was broken only by the rustling leaves and the distant calls of unseen birds. The immediate threat had dispersed. The barbarian approached the fallen goblin. Its small green body was still on the forest floor. The air around it still carried a foul odor, mingled with the scent of blood and the barbarian's excrement. He knelt beside it and began to search its tattered leather tunic and loincloth. He found a pouch at its belt, and it contained 3 copper coins and a small, wickedly sharp dagger made of crudely worked iron. The rest of its belongings were little more than rags. The barbarian retrieved a length of the broken, braided vines from the snare that held him. The rough texture was abrasive against his hands. With practiced, brutal efficiency, he knotted the durable material into a crude noose. He leaned over the lifeless goblin, and he slipped the loop around its scrawny neck, letting the macabre decoration rest on its chest. The act was a silent, grim statement in the quiet heart of the forest, a warning to any who might stumble upon this scene, or perhaps a barbaric testament to his fury at being ensnared. The woods around him remained hushed. The barbarian grabbed the thick vine noose. The coarse fibers dug slightly into his palm. The goblin's body was surprisingly light as he hauled it along the forest floor, its limbs trailing awkwardly behind him. The scene of disturbed earth from the trap was still visible, a testament to his recent struggle. The barbarian began to walk. His great axe was slung over his shoulder, and the dead goblin, a grim trophy, was dragged through the dappled sunlight. The forest watched his passage. The rustling leaves and chirping birds continued their indifferent symphony. The gamey scent seemed to follow the barbarian, or perhaps it was the presence of the deceased goblin he dragged behind him. Either way, he did not care. He walked deeper into the woods, The path ahead unknown. The barbarian decided the goblin needed a name, and Kenny came to mind. "Kenny," the barbarian said, and then he laughed. His grim companion bumped and scraped against the roots and stones as he pulled Kenny deeper into the forest. The silent journey continued. The sun filtered through the dense canopy in shifting patterns. The barbarian passed by ancient, moss-covered trees and thickets of thorny bushes. Each step took him further from the ambush site. The forest remained quiet, save for the sounds of his passage and the occasional distant bird call. The scent of damp earth and pine needles filled the air, mingling with the faint, unpleasant odor of Kenny's corpse. He looked down at the lifeless form of Kenny, and his beady eyes stared blankly at the canopy above, his mouth frozen in a silent grimace. He offered no reply to the new name. The only sounds were the natural whispers of the woods and the slight drag of its body against the earth as the barbarian continued his trek. The barbarian asked the dead goblin a question to pass the time and waited patiently for a reply. However, Kenny remained as silent and unmoved as the ancient trees around him. His vacant stare provided no confirmation of the weather in his former abode. He continued to drag his body behind him. The rhythmic scrape of his form against the forest floor accompanied the barbarian's journey. The sun began to dip lower and cast longer, more ominous shadows through the dense woods, and the chirping of birds gave way to the deeper, more secretive sounds of the approaching twilight. The barbarian inquired about Kenny's family, but the dead goblin offered nothing. His small, lifeless form bumped against a gnarled root as the barbarian dragged him onward, a silent passenger on the barbarian's journey. The forest around him grew dim as the sun sank further below the horizon. It cast the woods in deep, purple shadows. A cool breeze whispered through the leaves and carried the faint, damp scent of evening dew. The silence of the dying day was broken only by footsteps and the rhythmic drag of Kenny behind him. "Damn! She got the kids, too!" the barbarian responded to an imaginary reply. Kenny remained unresponsive. His vacant gaze was fixed on nothing. The silence of the dark forest was the only answer. The last sliver of the sun vanished behind the distant tree line, plunging the woods into a deep, velvety twilight. The familiar rustle of leaves took on a more ominous quality in the encroaching darkness, and the faint hoot of an owl echoed through the trees. The barbarian continued to drag Kenny, his body now a dark silhouette against the deepening gloom.